Hey everyone, welcome back to the Workplace and Apprenticeship 10 videos. In this video, we're going to look at Lesson 5 from Chapter 7, which is looking at finding angles. So what happens if we don't know which primary trigonometric ratio we should use? And how on earth could we be expected to remember all of those ratios? So one thing that probably majority, if not all mathematicians use for your primary trigonometric ratios is a jingle called SOHCAHTOA. If you can remember SOHCAHTOA, this is going to be extremely helpful for you for not only grade 10, grade 11, and grade 12 math. So one thing that's really awesome about this is that this tells you the direct order of your primary trigonometric ratios and which sides belong to that ratio. So says sine is equal to opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is equal to your opposite over adjacent. So SOHCAHTOA literally tells you those three trigonometric ratios, and it even gives it to you in order. The first one is our ratio. Then it tells you what is on the top of the fraction, and then what is on the bottom of the fraction. So here this would be sine of theta is equal to opposite over your hypotenuse. Looking at ca, same thing. First letter is your ratio, so you have cosine of theta is equal to, so your first letter or your middle letter here is the top of that fraction, so it's your adjacent over your hypotenuse. And tan of theta is equal to your opposite over adjacent. So this jingle not only tells you the three ratios, it also tells you in order, going from your ratio to the top of the fraction to the bottom of the fraction, which sides you're going to be using to solve. So this is going to be extremely important, and I'm going to recommend that on your assignments, on your tests, the first thing you're going to do when you get it is you're going to write SOHCAHTOA on the top, and that way you just use it as a quick reference guide. Because what you're going to have to do is, in order to solve for missing angles or sides, you're going to have to identify what you're given in that question. So say if you were given adjacent and hypotenuse, you just go back to this jingle and look at which one has an A for adjacent and H for hypotenuse. And in this case, that is cosine. It has AH. So that jingle is going to be your best friend for the rest of this chapter. So now we're going to look at an example from your notes, which is number 1. So here we're going to determine the angle of elevation to the top of a 5-meter tree at a point that is 3 meters from the base of the tree. So once again, I'm just going to draw a quick diagram of what's going on here. So here we're talking about a tree. So here I'm going to draw a nice fancy looking tree. And so we know that the angle of elevation to the top of a 5-meter tree, so this one here tells us the 5-meter tree, so it tells us our height of our tree, and it is 3 meters from the base. So when we're talking about away from the base, we're basically look at that distance away on the ground. And then we have this angle of elevation, which is looking up to the top of the tree. So we're determining the angle of elevation. So when we look at the angle of elevation, it's usually some sort of reference point from a straight horizontal line. And when we're talking about elevation, we're talking about going up somewhere. So that's how we determine where the angle of elevation is. And then we know that the top of a 5-meter tree tells us the height, and then at a point 3 meters away. So here we have a nice right triangle. And so now what we have to do is we have to find this angle theta. And so in order to find the angle theta, we know that we're using those primary trigonometric ratios because we're working with angles. If we were working with only sides, that would tell us that we're using the Pythagorean theorem. But in this case, we have an angle, so we know we're using those ratios. And then what we need to do is ask ourselves, Well, are we going to be using sine, cosine, or tan? So in order to determine that, what you need to do is label your triangle. So when I talk about labeling your triangle, that's in terms of your adjacent, opposite, and hypotenuse. So even if it helps, what I might do is label your entire triangle. So my easiest one is my hypotenuse. Then opposite our angle is 5 over here. So this here is our opposite side. And then our adjacent is the very last one. Then I'm going to circle what I'm working with. So here I'm working with my adjacent. I'm working with my opposite. So we're using opposite and adjacent. So I want to look for the ratio that has an O and an A. So I'm just going to scroll back up to my little jingle up here. So I want to look for either sine, cosine, or tan, and one of those has to have an opposite and adjacent in their formula. So we have O and H, A and H, and we have O and A. So here we're going to be using the tan ratio because it has both opposite and adjacent. So therefore, use tangent ratio. So I'm going to start off by writing my ratio. So we have tan of theta is equal to my opposite over adjacent. And then I'm going to fill in what I know. So I'm looking for my angle, so I'm just going to rewrite this as tan of theta. That's equal to my opposite, which is 5, and my adjacent, which is 3. So just like I said in my previous videos, when we're working with angles, when we're looking at finding an angle, what we have to do is we want to get this tan to the other side. And in order to move it to the other side, we have to use that opposite operation, which in this case is tan inverse. So we take tan inverse of this entire right side, so of 5 over 3, and this is exactly what it's going to look like when we put it into our calculators. So we're going to go tan inverse, and then bracket 5 divided by 3, close your bracket. Once again, just remember, you have to make sure your calculator is in degrees when you're doing this question, and you might also have a bit of a different method depending on what type of calculator you're working with, but the big thing is to know your calculator. So most people will put in exactly as they see it on the screen here. So when we put that into our calculator, we should find that our answer is 59 degrees. And just remember, my standard for angles, I like to go to the nearest whole number, whereas sides I like to go to 2 decimals. So in this case here, our angle of elevation is 59 degrees, and we're going to finish that off with a sentence. So you could say the angle of elevation is 59 degrees. So that is everything here for this video. So if you guys have any more questions, make sure to come see me in class or text me on Remind 101. And thank you guys so much for watching.